Get this monkey away from my table. And wipe that speck off your face. You're ruining the ambience. Rebecca Carlson rises from the VIP table at the exclusive Monaco Wine Reserve Gala. With a smirk carved from entitlement, she lifts a $9,000 bottle of Bordeaux and pours it directly down Miguel Johnson's head. The red wine streams over his hair, down his face, soaking his white shirt like a slow crimson slash across linen. Phones lift. Cameras record. Influencers whisper. The room freezes around the humiliation. You people need to know your place, she sneers, setting the empty bottle down with a sharp, ringing click. She had no clue she'd just obliterated her family's global empire. Because the man she publicly drenched wasn't a waiter stumbling into the wrong circle. He was Miguel Johnson, Harvard economist, chief strategist of the Azania Sovereign Wealth Fund, and the only person authorized to finalize or kill the $10 billion deal Carlson Global needed to survive the week. It only takes one moment of arrogance to detonate an empire. Let's rewind 12 hours before it all began. Before we proceed, please like this video, subscribe and comment where you're watching from to support our growth. Now let's proceed. Morning sunlight spilled across the Carlson penthouse like a spotlight demanding Rebecca's attention. She stretched lazily beneath silk sheets while three stylists hovered nearby, whispering among themselves as if afraid to disturb royalty. One adjusted the steam wand for her hair, another pressed a freshly tailored designer dress, and a third scrolled through mood boards to match her nail color to her evening gown. Rebecca didn't look at any of them. She expected efficiency, not conversation. "Can we move faster?" she said, flicking her wrist dismissively as she stared at her own reflection. "I'm not spending all morning watching you people fumble around." The stylists exchanged glances but complied in frantic silence. Entitlement clung to her like perfume, thick, expensive, and suffocating. On the far side of the suite, two assistants stood over laptops, swiping through financial reports and urgent emails streaming in from Carlson Global Holdings headquarters. Every message looked the same: red charts, plunging lines, collapsing investor confidence. Liquidity crisis deepening, international partners requesting transparency documents, stock trending downward. They muttered, trying to condense disaster into digestible fragments, but Rebecca wasn't listening. She was choosing earrings. "Tell my father," she said without looking up, "that I'll review whatever he wants after the gala. Not before." Her lead assistant hesitated. "Ma'am," he said, "it's urgent. The board is demanding." Rebecca raised a hand, palm out. "I said after." The assistant lowered his head. The Carlson empire might have been crumbling, but the princess still ruled her floor. Across the penthouse, a television quietly played a business news ticker. Carlson Global stock at 12-year low. Investors speculate leadership shake-up. Leaks hint at regulatory scrutiny. Every headline was another crack in the foundation, but Rebecca's eyes slid past them with irritation, not concern. For her, these problems were abstract, distant, like storms meant for other people to endure. Then her father burst into the room. Richard Carlson, once a titan of global influence, looked smaller than usual. His suit was immaculate, but his face carried the exhaustion of someone fighting 12 fires at once. He didn't greet her. He didn't look at the stylists. He went straight to the point. "Rebecca," he said sharply, "this gala is not a playground tonight. You need to be on your best behavior." She rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. It's a wine tasting, not a political summit." "It is a political summit, in its own way," he snapped. "Our entire future depends on landing the Azania deal tomorrow. That sovereign fund is our last lifeline. If they walk away—" "They won't," she interrupted, waving a mascara wand as though commanding the universe. "Everyone wants to work with us. They always do." His jaw tightened. "Not anymore. Times are different." Rebecca set down the wand and sighed dramatically. "Dad, you worry too much. And you worry too little," he said. Just smile tonight. Be gracious. Don't give anyone reason to doubt us. She nodded, but not out of agreement, just to end the conversation. As soon as he turned away, she whispered to a stylist, "He always gets dramatic before big events. He'll be fine." Her mother drifted in moments later, draped in pearls and judgment. Helen Carlson surveyed the room with an icy gaze, then paused upon seeing Rebecca's outfit. "Lower neckline," Helen said. "And no bold lipstick. We need to project restraint. The family cannot appear flashy right now." Rebecca bristled. "I am not shrinking myself because the company had a few rough months." Helen's lips curved into a cold half-smile. "It's been more than a few rough months, and the board is looking for someone to blame." The words hovered like smoke. For the first time all morning, Rebecca faltered, then immediately deflected. "Well, it won't be me." Her mother leaned in, whispering, "It might be, darling. You've drawn too much attention lately." Rebecca pushed her hand away. Her fiancé, Daniel Hawthorne, arrived next, perfect suit, perfect smile, perfectly empty behind the eyes. He kissed Rebecca's cheek lightly, careful not to smudge her makeup. "You ready for tonight?" he asked. "Always," she said. "And don't hover. I don't need a babysitter." "I'm just trying to help," he replied, though his tone held no warmth. He wasn't here for love. He was here for proximity to Carlson wealth. Rebecca knew it. She didn't care. Appearances mattered more than sincerity. "But seriously," Daniel added, lowering his voice, "maybe don't snap at people tonight. Your father's on edge, and the board is watching." Rebecca's jaw clenched. "You sound like them. Someone has to." She turned away, dismissing him like another accessory she'd grown bored of. Meanwhile, hundreds of kilometers away, Miguel Johnson sat in a quiet diplomatic office in Monaco, reviewing documents. He wore a simple tailored suit, nothing flashy, and prepped for the evening ahead. Not as a guest. Not as a dignitary. But incognito. His mission was precise. Observe the Carlsons. Assess their character. Determine if Azania could trust them with one of the continent's largest infrastructure deals in history. His superiors valued cultural integrity as much as financial competence. Rumors of arrogance and misconduct had already placed Carlson Global on thin ice. Tonight's gala was the final test. Miguel gathered his notes quietly. To him, tonight wasn't a party. It was a battlefield disguised in crystal chandeliers and vintage wine. Back in the penthouse, Rebecca examined herself in the mirror. She saw perfection. Polished hair, sculpted brows, couture gown shimmering like authority wrapped in diamonds. The world would revolve around her tonight, just as it always had. She didn't see the cracks forming around her life. She didn't see how precarious her family's empire had become. She didn't see how dangerously close she was to igniting it all. What she saw was a stage. What Miguel saw was a cultural test. What the world would soon see was a collision. That evening, as the sun dipped over the Mediterranean, Rebecca stepped into her limousine with a smug smile, convinced the gala was hers to command. She had no idea she was marching toward the moment that would rewrite her destiny and destroy everything her family had spent generations building. Monaco glowed like a jewel against the Riviera night, each street polished for the arrival of the world's richest, boldest, and most delusional. The annual Crystal Hall's humanitarian gala, priced at $50,000 per ticket, was less about humanity and more about who glittered most beneath the chandeliers. Cameras flashed like 1,000 tiny suns, and the air hummed with ego, perfume, and unearned importance. Inside, the Crystal Hall's ballroom was a cathedral of opulence. Cascading crystal sculptures, ice blue lights, champagne towers rising taller than some of the politicians attending. Every table was dressed in silk. Every conversation fought to sound elite. Every smile hid a weapon. Rebecca Carlson stepped into it all like she owned the century. Her gown shimmered in molten gold, her makeup sculpted to perfection, her posture sharpened by a lifetime of entitlement. People parted for her, not out of respect, but to avoid her. Rebecca never noticed the difference. She floated from conversation to conversation, letting her words drip with the casual venom she mistook for wit. Did you hear the violinist warming up earlier? I'm sure she cost a fortune, but bless her, she still sounds provincial. A giggle from two socialites who didn't dare do anything else. Moments later, she leaned toward a server, eyes narrowed. Careful with that tray. If you drop it, I promise nobody in this room will hire you again. The server murmured an apology, and Rebecca flashed a victorious smile, one that made several nearby guests exchange uneasy glances. Her comments grew sharper as her champagne intake increased. It wasn't drunkenness. It was the slow unmasking of someone who believed cruelty made her interesting. She mocked an investor's Nigerian accent. She told a junior diplomat's wife that her dress looked like charity work. She dismissed the environmental minister with a, "Sweetheart, nobody actually cares about the oceans. People care about yachts." Guests whispered. Phones angled discreetly. Rebecca didn't see any of it. She was too busy performing for an audience that was already pulling away. Across the ballroom, the doors opened, and the atmosphere shifted. Miguel entered quietly, without theatrics, yet the ripple he created was immediate. A few heads turned. Then more. Then nearly the entire circle of high-level attendees began making their way toward him. Miguel Reyes, global ethics auditor, corporate investigator, the man governments listened to when they pretended to fix corruption. Calm. Precise. Impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit. His presence was a silent warning that someone somewhere had run out of time. But tonight, he wasn't here to blow anything up, yet. Tonight, he was simply observing, calculating, preparing. Several CEOs approached him with genuine admiration. A prime minister clasped his shoulder and whispered something with a relieved smile. A Saudi investment heir bowed his head respectfully. A French philanthropist hugged him warmly, calling him the man who actually cleans up our mess. Rebecca watched all of this with tightening irritation. Who the hell was he? And why was the room bending around him when it should have been bending around her? She sipped her next glass of wine with a glare sharp enough to cut crystal. Attention was the currency she lived on, and Miguel, the man clearing a quiet path through the elite, was stealing it without even trying. The moment their eyes met, Miguel acknowledged her with a polite nod. Not submissive. Not impressed. Just neutral. And that neutrality felt to Rebecca like a slap. Her fiancé drifted beside her, distracted by his own networking. He whispered something about needing to find a minister who owed him a favor, then disappeared again. Typical. Rebecca was alone, annoyed, and eager to reclaim the room. So when she saw Miguel pause near the server station, she made her choice. She forced her way toward him with the theatrical smile of a woman about to stage a scene she'd later blame on champagne. Guests subtly stepped aside. Many already sensed where this was going. Miguel didn't move. He simply raised an eyebrow as Rebecca approached, slowly, like a predator with no idea the prey was actually a tiger. "Well," she said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "if it isn't Monaco's newest celebrity. I didn't realize the help got red carpets tonight." A few guests stiffened. Someone murmured, "Does she know who he is?" Someone else recorded. Miguel offered a measured smile. "I'm not here for carpets. Just observation." "Oh, trust me," she purred. "Everyone is observing you. It's adorable." Then, because Rebecca never let a moment end when she could escalate it, she reached for the nearest wine glass on a server's tray. Dark red. Expensive. And very full. Miguel saw the intention half a second before she acted, but he didn't step back. He only inhaled once, deep enough to memorize the arrogance, the entitlement, the absolute lack of awareness about the target she had chosen. Rebecca lifted the glass, and she poured the wine down his head. The red soaked into his hair, his collar, cascading like blood down silk. A collective gasp sliced through the ballroom. Cameras rose. Phones recorded openly now. The server froze in horror. Even the usually detached elites looked shaken. Rebecca smiled proudly, as if she'd just pulled off the punchline of a brilliant joke. "There," she said. "Now you look like you belong. Maybe next time you'll enter through the staff doors." Silence. Miguel didn't shout, didn't flinch, didn't even wipe the wine from his face. He simply looked at her, calm, steady, the quiet before a storm that had already been building long before she entered the room. In that moment, people realized something Rebecca did not. She hadn't just humiliated a stranger. She had publicly mocked, assaulted, and degraded the one man whose report could end her family, her company, and her future. Miguel finally spoke, voice soft and lethal. "Noted." Rebecca laughed, triumphant, and around her, the elite began taking slow steps back, because they understood exactly what she had done. Rebecca Carlson had triggered the downfall she'd been warned about, and she had done it with a smile. The gala hadn't even finished before the world began burning. At 11:43 p.m., exactly 15 minutes after Rebecca tipped the wine down Miguel's head, the first video hit social media. A shaky angle at first, posted by a junior diplomat's intern. Then a clearer version from a French investor's wife. Then a crisp 4K recording from the environmental minister's aide, captioned simply, "This is who the Carlsons really are. #Carlson Wine Strike." Within 5 minutes, the hashtag was trending in Monaco. By minute 9, France and Spain. By minute 12, the United States, Nigeria, Brazil. At minute 15, it detonated globally. Miguel, still in the ballroom, checked his phone only once. Notifications stacked like a digital avalanche. He sighed quietly, not out of satisfaction, but inevitability. Rebecca had no idea. She was still basking in the attention she thought she'd generated, unaware that the room's sudden hush wasn't admiration, it was recoil. Her fiancé tried to pull her aside, but Rebecca shooed him away, insisting, "Relax, it was just a joke." A joke. By midnight, millions disagreed. The first major news outlet to pick up the story was a Nigerian network. Then Al Jazeera. Then Reuters. Then every outlet that fed on scandal, hypocrisy, racism, or the public humiliation of the wealthy. Clips replayed endlessly, Rebecca's smirk, the wine cascading down Miguel's head, the gasps in the background. Analysts dissected every second. Linguists weighed in on tone and intention. Body language experts gave breakdowns. An ethics blog wrote, "She poured wine on the one man whose career is built on exposing corruption. This isn't just cruelty, it's stupidity." By 3 a.m., Carlson Global stock had begun free-falling in after-hours trading. Investors didn't wait. They didn't need to. The board issued a private internal alert. Immediate damage control required. Expect overnight losses. They underestimated. When the markets opened at sunrise, Carlson Global dropped 19% before Rebecca even woke up. In Lagos, protesters gathered with signs reading, "Dignity is not optional. Racism is not luxury entertainment. We stand with Miguel." In Johannesburg, university students marched outside the Carlson Foundation office, chanting, "Accountability now." The office shut its doors by noon. In Sao Paulo, activists held a wine-soaked mannequin with a golden wig slumped over a chair. It went viral instantly. Human rights groups condemned Rebecca by name in official statements. The International Labor Ethics Commission published a 2-page denunciation before lunchtime. At Carlson Global headquarters in Geneva, the boardroom looked like a bunker under siege. Screens displayed stock graphs dropping like a stone. Executives shouted over each other, trying to find a way to distance themselves from a woman whose last name was literally on the building. One board member said quietly, "We were already teetering. She just set fire to the foundation." Another responded, "Find Miguel. Pray he's willing to talk privately before he talks publicly." But Miguel was already on a flight out of Monaco, unreachable by design. Rebecca finally woke at 11:14 a.m., face puffy, head throbbing, unaware that she had become the most hated woman on the internet. She scrolled through her phone lazily, yawning. Then she saw it. Video after video. Millions of comments. Her name trending for all the wrong reasons. The hashtag Carlson wine strike. Clips of her smirk turned into memes, t-shirts, TikTok remixes, political cartoons. Her shock didn't last long enough. It flipped into anger, then denial, then, worst of all, performance. She opened her front camera, flipped her hair, and hit record. Her apology lasted 37 seconds and destroyed whatever was left of her reputation. She rolled her eyes halfway through it. She blamed lighting and camera angles. She said people were too sensitive. She insisted it was just wine, not acid. She smiled, while saying she was deeply sorry if anyone misunderstood. The internet responded like a lion smelling blood. Her video hit 2 million dislikes before it hit 100,000 views. Comment sections turned feral. Brands that had once begged to dress her began issuing statements like, "We condemn all discriminatory actions displayed in the viral video. We have no current or future associations with Rebecca Carlson." Her modeling agency dropped her within the hour. A charity rescinded her ambassadorship. The Monaco Gala Committee blocked her number. Her mother called her screaming. Her father called her useless. Her fiancé texted that he needed space. Rebecca threw her phone at the wall. But the worst blow arrived at 6:40 p.m. The Azania Sovereign Wealth Fund, Carlson Global's last, biggest, most critical financial lifeline, posted an official notice on their government page. A single sentence. Ethical instability detected. Deal suspended pending full review. Those 5 words were an earthquake. Without the Azania deal, Carlson Global was functionally dead. Every department head knew it. Every investor knew it. Every employee knew it. Their entire future had depended on convincing Azania that Carlson Global could be ethically rehabilitated. Rebecca had ruined that in less than 10 seconds of cruelty. And the world wasn't finished with her. Editorials rolled out. The fall of an heiress. Wine, racism, and corporate collapse. When entitlement meets accountability. Influencers dissected the event hour by hour. Late-night hosts roasted her. Even normally neutral economists agreed. This is the most rapid public-to-corporate implosion caused by a single person in modern history. Back at his temporary residence in Cape Verde, Miguel finally switched his phone back on. Hundreds of messages. Thousands of notifications. Invitations from major networks to interview. Requests from activists. Offers from governments. Urgent pleas from Carlson Global. Miguel read none of them. He simply opened a file labeled Carlson Report, Preliminary Findings. He added one line. Escalation triggered by subject's own behavior. Proceed with full investigation. Then he closed the laptop. Outside, the world kept burning. Inside, Miguel prepared to finish what Rebecca had started, with her own hands, when she tipped that glass of wine. The world thought Rebecca's humiliation of Miguel was the story. It wasn't. It was only the spark that exposed a mountain of buried dynamite. By the time Carlson Global executives staggered into their offices the next morning, the company was already under siege. Not from protesters, not yet, but from something far more dangerous. Regulators. At 8:12 a.m., Swiss authorities arrived at Carlson's Geneva headquarters with sealed warrants. At 8:25, environmental enforcement officers entered the company's Rotterdam division. At 9:03, U.S. securities investigators arrived at their Manhattan office. And at 9:40, EU anti-bribery inspectors burst into their Paris branch, demanding access to servers and accounting files. The viral video had not only enraged the world. It had given every watchdog agency the political cover to do what they had wanted to do for years. Inside the Geneva headquarters, panic fractured the air. Executives shouted across the war room, some cried, others paced with white faces as investigators bagged hard drives, cataloged documents, and sealed off rooms. One board member whispered to another, "We never would have survived scrutiny. But this is a firing squad." The full scale of the misconduct came in waves, each more damning than the last. Wave 1. Bribery. Hidden payments funneled through shell foundations. Consulting fees to foreign officials. Unexplained gifts, cars, villas, luxury retreats. These files had been tucked deep in encrypted folders, shielded behind layers of legal smoke. The investigators found everything. Wave 2. Environmental violations. Toxic waste illegally dumped off West African coasts. Misreported emissions. Forged safety audits. A decade-long pattern of cost-cutting at the expense of human lives and ecosystems. Videos surfaced. Workers forced to operate without protective gear, managers instructing teams to pretend the samples are clean. Wave 3. Manipulated financial statements. Profits overstated. Losses buried. Debts hidden in offshore accounts. Fabricated performance metrics sent to investors. One investigator held up a falsified quarterly report and said flatly, "This alone is enough to dismantle the entire leadership." Wave 4. Hidden debts. Not millions. Billions. Debts concealed through a labyrinth of subsidiaries. Obligations disguised as assets. The company had been bleeding out for years, and lying about it. The only reason they hadn't imploded already was because no one had been allowed to look behind the curtain. The viral wine incident had torn the curtain down. While regulators swarmed every Carlson entity, Rebecca's world collapsed in quieter, more personal ways. Her fiancé, Leonard, who had spent years flaunting her last name as though it were his own inheritance, finally saw the writing on the wall. He called her from a private number, because she had begun calling him non-stop, and delivered his carefully rehearsed speech. "Rebecca, I need time. The situation is unstable. My family thinks it's best for us to take a break." "A break?" she snapped. "Leonard, you said you loved me." He exhaled, long, exhausted, relieved to be on the brink of escape. "I love stability, Rebecca. I love the future we talked about. But right now, you're toxic." She froze. Toxic. Her voice cracked. "Everyone is blowing this out of." "It's not everyone," he cut in. "It's me. I have a reputation, too." And he hung up. That was how Rebecca Carlson learned she was only ever valuable as long as she was useful. Her friends followed the same pattern. Normally her messages exploded with replies, invitations, gossip. But now, seen, seen, seen. No response. A few blocked her entirely. The Monaco socialites who once orbited her like glittering satellites now treated her like a radioactive hazard. Even the clubs that once begged for her appearance quietly scrubbed her from their guest lists. Privilege had evaporated. Her circle had evaporated. Only consequences remained. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Miguel sat in a quiet coastal office in Cape Verde, reviewing updates from his team. His phone buzzed non-stop with messages from those who had seen the video. Diplomats, students, human rights advocates, ordinary citizens who dealt with situations just like his, but without the status, power, or platform. Thank you for standing firm. You handled it with dignity. You showed the world we don't have to accept disrespect. Miguel read each one with calm gratitude, but he wasn't celebrating. He had seen empire after empire crumble from arrogance. Carlson Global was no different. His chief analyst entered with a tablet. Sir, regulators are tearing through their records. Everything's unraveling fast. Miguel nodded. It was expected. And the Azania deal? The analyst asked. Miguel closed the file on his screen, Carlson Global's thick, ugly portfolio of misconduct, and took a slow breath. Prepare the final memo. The analyst straightened. The termination memo? Yes. Do you want to speak with their board first? No, Miguel's voice was steady. The world has spoken for me. He typed the final line into the memo. Recommendation: terminate partnership. Zero confidence in ethical capacity. The analyst sent it through the secure government system. With one keystroke, a $10 billion deal evaporated. The last pillar holding up the Carlson empire fell. Back in Geneva, the fallout struck instantly. Board members were cornered in conference rooms by investigators demanding explanations for emails, invoices, and falsified statements. Lawyers scrambled but couldn't keep up. Panic spread like infection. One senior executive whispered into the void, "This would have stayed buried. All of it. If she hadn't." He couldn't finish the sentence. Everyone knew how it ended. In a penthouse overlooking the marina, Rebecca sat alone in silence, her phone finally dead, her reputation vaporized, and her family's empire collapsing because of one moment she still refused to take responsibility for. She told herself she was the victim. She told herself the world was overreacting. She told herself things would blow over soon. But the truth was already circulating through financial channels worldwide. Carlson Global had been exposed. The empire was rotten, and the heiress who poured the wine had become the match that lit the pyre. The air in Carlson Global's Geneva headquarters was electric with dread. The boardroom, normally a polished temple of wealth and power, had transformed into a tribunal. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the late morning sun onto the anxious faces of directors, lawyers, and family members. Silence had long since abandoned the room, replaced by the nervous hum of a company on the edge of collapse. Rebecca Carlson sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, the remnants of her privilege clinging to her posture, though she was acutely aware it offered her no protection here. She had thought the wine incident was a private show of dominance, a fleeting embarrassment for a waiter. Now the room felt like a courtroom, and she was both defendant and exhibit. Her father, Jonathan Carlson, CEO and patriarch of the family empire, sat directly across from her. His face was pale, tight with a combination of anger, shame, and disbelief. He had spent decades building the Carlson Global fortune, and now the woman who had been raised to inherit it was threatening to destroy it in one public moment. "We are gathered," began the lead corporate counsel, a severe woman in a tailored navy suit, "to address the recent incidents and their ongoing ramifications for Carlson Global Holdings." Her eyes swept the room, stopping briefly on Rebecca. This includes both the Monaco gala incident and the subsequent revelations regarding company misconduct uncovered in the past 24 hours. Rebecca's pulse quickened. She tried to maintain composure, curling her fingers around her chair's arms, the taste of panic tangling with her usual arrogance. The lawyers presented a dossier, thick with documents, photographs, and videos. Each exhibit detailed previous incidents Rebecca thought had been swept under the rug. Instances of discriminatory behavior at private events, harshly worded memos to junior staff, and internal complaints long ignored by human resources now surfaced under the unforgiving gaze of the board. Jonathan Carlson rose, attempting to salvage some dignity for his daughter. "Rebecca made a mistake," he said, voice firm yet strained. "She has always acted in the best interests of the family and the company. Surely, We can resolve this without completely stripping her of her responsibilities." A murmur rippled through the boardroom. Several directors exchanged glances, their disapproval thinly veiled. The council continued, unfazed. "Sir, the issue is no longer limited to a single public misstep." The Monaco gala video went viral under the hashtag Carlson wine strike. International networks replayed the incident, and Carlson Global's reputation has suffered irreparable damage. Additionally, regulators have uncovered significant financial and ethical violations within the company, now tied directly to the leadership culture, specifically the influence and actions of Ms. Carlson. The room seemed to close in on Rebecca. Her meticulously styled hair and designer attire could no longer shield her. Each director, formerly deferential, now stared at her with a mixture of judgment and disbelief. "Enough!" Jonathan snapped, slamming a hand onto the table. "She is my daughter. She has value to this company. She made an error, yes, but she does not deserve total ruin." One of the senior board members, a woman whose career had weathered numerous corporate crises, shook her head slowly. "Sir, with all due respect, this is not about personal favor. It is about fiduciary responsibility. The company's survival is at stake, and Rebecca Carlson's behavior, both publicly and internally, has jeopardized that survival." Lawyers presented a final, damning piece of evidence, a confidential memo from a Zania sovereign wealth fund confirming the termination of the $10 billion deal due to ethical instability. It was signed, time-stamped, and irrevocable. The room went silent again. Rebecca's father lowered his head, covering his face with his hands. He had known this day might come, but never imagined it would arrive in such a spectacularly humiliating fashion. He looked up, meeting Rebecca's eyes, his expression breaking. "You didn't hurt just yourself," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, yet every word echoed through the chamber. "You ended us." The board, after brief deliberation, voted unanimously. Rebecca Carlson was stripped of all official duties, including her title as heir apparent. Her accounts, previously a symbol of boundless privilege, were frozen immediately. Travel privileges were revoked, restricting her movements both domestically and internationally. She was placed under a new set of family-imposed restrictions, dubbed Family Disciplinary Review, effectively cutting her off from any decision-making authority or public-facing engagements. Her cell phone buzzed incessantly. Messages from friends, advisors, and social contacts flooded in. Many were apologies, some were cold warnings, and the rest were silent accusations of abandoning her in the storm she had created. Each notification underscored the isolation that now defined her life. Rebecca sank back into her chair, the full weight of humiliation settling like a lead cloak across her shoulders. This was not just corporate chastisement, it was social, personal, and existential. She realized, in a way she never had before, that privilege and beauty could not protect her from accountability. Every ounce of arrogance, every careless word and deed had accumulated into a perfect storm of ruin. Outside the boardroom, the global press had already caught wind of the emergency proceedings. Tweets, live updates, and analysis columns flooded financial and social platforms. Analysts predicted catastrophic losses for Carlson Global, while the viral video of the gala incident became the centerpiece of discussions on corporate ethics, racial sensitivity, and leadership responsibility. Rebecca watched, numb, as the consequences she had so long ignored swept over her. The room felt colder now, every chair, every glass, every polished surface a mirror reflecting a single truth. Her empire, built on generations of careful maneuvering and family ambition, had collapsed in part because of her own reckless arrogance. The lead counsel concluded, voice unwavering, "The board has acted not out of spite, but out of necessity. The company's future, and the protection of its stakeholders, demands these measures." Jonathan Carlson rested his hands on the table, the weight of paternal despair etched into his face. He did not defend her further. Words would no longer help. Rebecca sat in silence, stripped of power, stripped of influence, stripped of the illusion that she could bend the world to her will. The boardroom, once a place of celebration and strategy, had become the crucible in which she would confront the consequences of a lifetime of entitlement. The pyre of her public and private life had been lit, and there was no escaping the flames. The conference hall of the Global Economic Diplomacy Summit in Geneva glittered under a ceiling of crystal chandeliers, each prism casting 1,000 reflections across the polished marble floor. World leaders, sovereign fund representatives, corporate titans, and journalists from every continent were gathered under one roof. Cameras lined the perimeter of the hall, their lenses capturing the gravity of what was about to unfold. The air was taut, charged with anticipation, whispers bouncing across the room like static. Jonathan Carlson, CEO of Carlson Global Holdings, sat at the front row, his tailored suit pressed but his composure fraying at the edges. Beads of sweat clung to his temples, and his hands gripped the armrests of the chair as if it could anchor him against the tidal wave of impending catastrophe. For months, he had maneuvered to secure the $10 billion deal with the Azania Sovereign Wealth Fund, the final lifeline for the empire he had built over decades. And yet, after a single moment of his daughter's reckless arrogance, he found himself pleading for mercy in a hall of the most influential people on the planet. "Please," he said quietly, almost to himself, but the words carried in the hushed tension of the room. "Please reconsider. I assure you, the behavior was personal, impulsive. It does not reflect the values of Carlson Global Holdings." His plea was punctuated by the clicking of camera shutters, a digital chorus broadcasting the moment to millions of viewers worldwide. Every word, every movement, was being recorded, archived, and analyzed. Jonathan's desperation was visible to all, but here, the decision rested with one person, the man whose authority was absolute. Miguel Johnson entered the hall with a quiet, measured confidence. His presence did not demand attention, yet it commanded it. Heads turned, whispers flared, and even the most seasoned diplomats and corporate leaders recognized the unmistakable air of someone in full control. Miguel moved with precision, each step deliberate, each gesture calculated. Where Rebecca's actions had been flamboyant and destructive, Miguel's were calm and authoritative. He took his place at the head of the Azania delegation, removing his coat and straightening his posture. A subtle hush fell across the hall. The tension was nearly tangible, a force pressing on every attendee. All eyes now focused on him. Every anticipation, every hope for reversal, converged on this one figure. Jonathan Carlson swallowed hard, rising slightly from his chair to meet Miguel's gaze. His voice trembled as he addressed the delegation. "Mr. Johnson, my family and I understand the seriousness of the events last night. My daughter, Rebecca, acted without thought, without awareness. I beg you to consider the years of partnership between our entities, the mutual benefits, the projects that will transform nations." Miguel's face remained unreadable, an impassive mask that revealed nothing. He gestured for silence, his hands steady, voice calm, but carrying the weight of authority. Carlson Global Holdings has demonstrated, through recent actions, a systemic cultural toxicity, Miguel began, his tone precise, almost surgical. The behavior of your representatives, particularly that of Ms. Rebecca Carlson at the Monaco gala, reflects a broader pattern of disregard for professional ethics, human dignity, and cultural respect. These are not isolated incidents. They are indicative of the leadership culture that governs this company. A ripple of unease passed through the Carlson delegation. Jonathan's jaw tightened. He realized the moment of personal appeal was failing. The room's collective breath seemed to hang suspended in time, waiting for the verdict that would define a global financial outcome. Miguel continued, his words measured but absolute. Given these findings, the Azania Sovereign Wealth Fund cannot, under any circumstances, proceed with the $10 billion energy infrastructure contract with Carlson Global Holdings. This decision is final. The cameras clicked in rapid succession. Reporters leaned forward, scribbling notes. Social media feeds lit up instantly, the news spreading across platforms even before the official press release hit. The financial markets, already jittery from the viral hashtag Carlson wine strike, responded in real time, with analysts predicting catastrophic losses for the company. Jonathan Carlson's shoulders slumped. Every negotiation tactic, every appeal to history and mutual benefit, fell on deaf ears. The deal, the empire-saving contract, was gone. Permanently. Miguel reached for the prepared documents, a simple signature line at the bottom of the cancellation form. With a single pen stroke, he finalized the termination. The flash of cameras captured it, immortalizing the moment when Carlson Global's $10 billion lifeline was severed. Rebecca Carlson watched the live stream from her penthouse suite in Monaco. She had been under house arrest by family-imposed restrictions, forced to witness the unfolding disaster she had caused. Her hands shook as she clutched her phone, unable to look away. The image of Miguel, composed and decisive, signing the cancellation, burned into her mind. Every ounce of wealth, power, and privilege she had taken for granted was slipping away in real time. Outside the summit hall, international markets were reacting. Stock tickers reflected precipitous drops in Carlson Global shares. Headlines flashed, Carlson Global $10 billion deal cancelled after Heiress incident, hashtag Carlson wine strike, corporate empire crumbles, Azania fund terminates contract amid ethical concerns. Governments, regulators, and corporate partners began evaluating the company's dealings, digging into every corner of its operations, all because of one act of hubris captured on film. The room in Geneva remained silent, every attendee aware they were witnessing the final collapse of an empire in miniature. The decision was irreversible. There would be no appeals, no second chances. The lesson was stark. Privilege and arrogance could not override ethics and authority. Miguel closed his folder, standing with quiet dignity. The decision has been communicated. Carlson Global Holdings will have the opportunity to restructure internally, but until such measures are implemented and verified, no negotiations with the Azania Sovereign Wealth Fund will be considered. The delegation filed out, leaving Jonathan Carlson seated, defeated, and alone with the full magnitude of the disaster. Cameras continued to flash, capturing the family patriarch's despair. For Rebecca, the collapse was simultaneously distant and intimate, a perfect storm of consequence that she had brought upon herself and her family. As the news spread globally, the narrative was clear. One moment of arrogance, one wine-spattered humiliation, had cost a multi-generational empire billions of dollars, reshaping the corporate landscape in a matter of hours. The $10 billion door had slammed shut. There was no turning back. The empire's fate had been sealed, and the world had watched it happen. The elevator doors opened to Rebecca Carlson's penthouse, and she stepped inside with a hollow sense of entitlement that had nowhere to land. The silence hit her first. No soft music, no assistants bustling, no stylists adjusting her couture dresses. The only sound was the faint hum of the city far below. The apartment that had once been a monument to privilege now felt like a mausoleum. The walls, lined with art worth millions, seemed to mock her. Every chandelier, every gilded chair, every marble surface reflected a life that had already begun to crumble. She walked slowly across the expansive living room, noting the absence of staff waiting to serve her morning tea, no assistants with their frantic notepads, no concierge whispering updates about high-profile social invitations. Everything was gone. Even the routine luxuries that had made her feel untouchable, the fresh bouquets of imported roses, the endless supply of custom-designed coffee mugs, the perfectly pressed linens, were gone, or at least neglected. The penthouse was hers, technically, but the life that gave it meaning had evaporated. Her phone buzzed incessantly, each notification a spike of dread. Messages from her fiancé were at the top, concise, cold, final. This engagement is over. I can no longer associate with you or your actions. She scrolled through the endless tide of emails, messages, and social media notifications. Friends, former colleagues, and influential socialites had blocked her. Invitations to exclusive events evaporated. Every networking channel she once wielded as a tool of influence had vanished. Strangers sent her messages, some incredulous, some hateful, some reveling in her downfall. Even the news coverage of the #Carlson wine strike had moved beyond spectacle into vilification, headlines labeling her as the embodiment of elitist arrogance, a cautionary tale of hubris, privilege, and racism. Rebecca sank onto a couch, her designer heels clicking faintly against the polished hardwood. Images of the Monaco gala flashed in her mind, each frame cutting deeper. Miguel Johnson's calm, dignified posture as the wine poured over him, the whispered gasps of the crowd, the glint of cameras capturing the act for all eternity. Her humiliation had been visible. Her father's horror, her fiancé's disbelief, the collective judgment of the world, etched into her memory. And beyond that, the cascade of consequences, the loss of the $10 billion deal, the plummeting stock, the investigations into Carlson Global's misdeeds. Every action she had taken, every careless word, had contributed to the avalanche that now threatened to bury her family's empire. Flashbacks assaulted her relentlessly. The way she had mocked the staff that morning, criticizing their accents, questioning their education, dismissing their efforts with a flick of her hand. The sharp tone in which she had scolded Miguel for staining her aura, as if anyone's life existed to serve hers. Each cruel comment, each act of entitlement, played repeatedly in her mind, magnified by the echo of global condemnation. She had been untouchable for so long, and yet now, stripped of the protection of status and wealth, the magnitude of harm she had inflicted became undeniable. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Miguel Johnson was receiving accolades for his steadfastness. News channels replayed his composed demeanor, commentators praised his professionalism, and analysts lauded his ethical leadership. Yet in the quiet of his office, he allowed himself a private reflection. He had achieved justice and accountability, yes, but at what cost? A family's reputation, decades of legacy, destroyed in a matter of hours. The weight of consequence pressed on him, even as the world celebrated his decisiveness. He understood the irony. His commitment to principles required collateral damage, even when it was deserved. Rebecca, isolated in her now empty penthouse, began to confront herself in ways she never had. There were no mirrors flattering her appearance, no socialites to admire her ensemble, no cameras to broadcast her charm. In the silence, she could only confront the reality of her actions. The first inkling of shame crept in, not the performative, fleeting embarrassment she was accustomed to, but a deeper, uncomfortable recognition of the real harm she had caused. She thought of the staff at the gala, the reporters filming, and Miguel himself, the man she had assumed powerless, but whose authority had irrevocably shifted the fate of her family and company. The contrast between their trajectories was stark. While she unraveled, stripped of privilege and facing the full scope of her mistakes, Miguel's reputation and influence expanded. He had transformed from a figure acting in anonymity to one whose integrity and judgment commanded global respect. The very act that had shattered her world had built his. Yet the quiet contemplation he allowed himself underscored an essential truth. Justice and morality often carry weight, even when the world interprets them as victory. Days turned into a rhythm of isolation for Rebecca. She moved through her apartment as though walking through a museum of a life already lost. The private jets she once boarded for spontaneous trips lay idle, the gardens she once admired remained untended, and the social calendars that had dictated her every move were now empty. The wealth and privilege that had insulated her from consequence no longer functioned as protection. They were simply objects, meaningless without respect, integrity, or human connection. The emotional collapse was gradual but absolute. For the first time, Rebecca was confronted with her vulnerability, stripped of the armor of status and social power. Each notification, each news headline, each memory from the gala reinforced a singular truth. Her actions had consequences beyond her immediate understanding, and privilege could not shield her from them. Even as she sat in her penthouse, grappling with the wreckage of her life, she began to notice small moments of clarity. A text from her former assistant, though curt, acknowledged her potential for change. A news segment highlighted corporate cultural reform inspired by Miguel's steadfastness. Though painful, These insights hinted at the possibility of learning, reflection, and eventual accountability. Rebecca Carlson's fall was complete, publicly, socially, and personally. But in the juxtaposition of her unraveling with Miguel Johnson's rise, a harsh but vital lesson became clear. Character, humility, and integrity mattered far more than wealth, influence, or entitlement. The silence of her penthouse now carried a strange resonance, a space for reflection, reckoning, and perhaps the first seeds of transformation. She could no longer hide behind her name, her family, or her wealth. She could only confront herself, her mistakes, and the human cost of her arrogance. The empire had fallen, and in the echoing emptiness of her life, Rebecca faced the hardest truth of all. She had to rebuild, starting with herself. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of the International Cultural Center, casting long, warm streaks across the polished floors. Rebecca Carlson walked quietly into the main hall, her steps measured, her designer heels replaced by sensible flats. The familiar sensation of privilege, once a shield she wore as naturally as her jewelry, felt alien now. Here, no one knew her name. No one cared about her family. No one waited to flatter her. The only expectation was work, humility, and attentiveness. Rebecca had been mandated to attend cultural competency workshops for months, a court-ordered response to the global fallout of #Carlson wine strike. At first, she had approached them with skepticism, a quiet resentment. She had bristled at lectures about empathy, human dignity, and accountability. But time had a way of stripping away superficial defenses. Sitting in the back row of the first sessions, she had slowly begun to see herself reflected in uncomfortable truths: arrogance, ignorance, cruelty. She had been a product of inherited power, insulated from consequence, and utterly unprepared to exist as a human among humans. Volunteering at the center was a different experience entirely. Here, she washed dishes, sorted donations, helped prepare materials for workshops, and occasionally guided visitors through exhibits highlighting stories of marginalized communities. Every task was mundane in comparison to the grandiosity of her former life, yet each carried weight. Each small act mattered because it helped someone else. For the first time, Rebecca realized her life could create impact beyond the whims of status or wealth. She was no longer performing for an audience. She was simply present, accountable for her own actions. The first weeks were humbling. A group of teenagers shared stories of discrimination they had endured in schools, neighborhoods, and workplaces. Rebecca listened silently, absorbing the raw honesty of their experiences. She had spent decades assuming the world revolved around her, but now she understood how damaging power unchecked by empathy could be. The realization stung. Her arrogance had hurt Miguel, her family, and countless unseen individuals who had suffered indirectly because of the culture of entitlement she embodied. Gradually, humility seeped in. She learned to take direction without complaint, to complete tasks without seeking recognition, and to see merit where once she saw only status. The slow rhythm of everyday responsibility became a teacher, its lessons more enduring than the fleeting thrill of social admiration. She discovered that dignity was earned, not inherited, and that accountability required confronting the smallest failings as rigorously as the largest. One crisp afternoon, months into her transformation, Rebecca was arranging chairs for a seminar when she felt a familiar presence. She looked up and saw Miguel Johnson. He moved quietly, confident yet unassuming, greeting staff and volunteers with ease. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a recognition passing between them, not a confrontation, not an apology, just acknowledgement. There was no dramatics, no lingering blame, only mutual respect. Miguel nodded slightly before continuing his duties, and Rebecca returned to her task, feeling a strange sense of closure. In that moment, she understood a profound truth. Her redemption wasn't about forgiveness from Miguel, her family, or the world. Redemption was internal. It was about confronting her own failings, choosing empathy over entitlement, and cultivating integrity where once there had been arrogance. She no longer sought approval or validation from the social hierarchy she once dominated. Instead, she sought to rebuild herself from the ground up, brick by brick, action by action. Days blurred into weeks. Rebecca remained diligent, working silently alongside other volunteers, helping organize cultural workshops, coordinating community programs, and listening to stories she had once dismissed as inconsequential. The work was repetitive, sometimes exhausting, but each success, each small gesture of assistance, felt earned. She began to notice subtle shifts in herself. Her tone softened, her patience grew, and her assumptions were challenged daily. The reflection in the mirror was no longer a caricature of entitlement, it was a woman learning to reconcile privilege with responsibility. Evenings were spent journaling, writing candidly about the moments that had brought her here, the gala, the spilled wine, the viral video, and the personal and corporate fallout that followed. Each entry became a thread, connecting her past actions to the lessons she was learning now. She documented her missteps without excuse, examining patterns of behavior she had once rationalized as natural or deserved. Slowly, these reflections translated into genuine behavioral change, informing her interactions with colleagues, strangers, and even herself. Rebecca's transformation did not go unnoticed by those around her. Fellow volunteers, initially skeptical of the heiress's presence, began to see her as reliable, attentive, and sincere. She was no longer the figure of ridicule from social media. She was simply a person willing to listen, learn, and act responsibly. Recognition became irrelevant. Personal growth became the reward. By the time she crossed paths with Miguel again in a community workshop, she had internalized the lessons fully. They shared no long conversation, no dramatic declaration, just a quiet nod, a brief acknowledgement of the journey each had endured. For Rebecca, it was symbolic. She had moved from being a catalyst of destruction to being an agent of reflection and potential positive change. The moment was small, but in it, she recognized the culmination of months of humility, patience, and self-confrontation. Her final reflection, penned in the quiet of her new routine, encapsulated the journey. Power built my world. Humility rebuilt me. It was a statement not of absolution granted by others, but of personal accountability embraced fully. The empire she had once known, the wealth, the influence, the social dominance, could never be reclaimed in the same form. But something far more valuable had emerged: self-awareness, moral clarity, and the quiet strength that comes from facing the consequences of one's actions. Rebecca Carlson had fallen, undeniably. But in the ruins of privilege, she had discovered the foundation for genuine humanity. And in that discovery lay the seeds of a redemption that would never be publicized, never monetized, but entirely real and entirely hers. Thank you for staying with this story until the very end. If you believe no human being, no matter their appearance, status, or struggles, deserves to be humiliated the way George was, hit subscribe. Only those who excuse cruelty, who hide behind titles and authority to mistreat the vulnerable, would turn away from what happened here. Don't be like them. Subscribe if you stand for dignity and fairness. And if you believe every person deserves respect, whether billionaire or homeless, comment, "Justice matters." Don't side with people who abuse their power.